About 6 years ago, we had a former president of the British Columbia Teachers Federation come to Chicago and meet with about 35 of us. We were the members of CORE, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators. And at that time, I remember she looked around at our little motley group and she said, where are the rest of you? And we were like, this is it, this is us, it's us. And she says, well, I'll never forget this because she has this beautiful accent. So she said, well, you might be able to win a few slates and positions on your executive board, and within 1 or 2 election cycles, you may actually be able to take leadership. And then 18 months later, what happened? We won. But what the British Columbia Teachers Federation did was to have an illegal strike. Okay, I want to say that again. BCTF had an illegal strike. And they shut down Vancouver because they had made relationships with parents, with community members, and with other unions. Nothing rolled in Vancouver. And one small woman stood up against all of that mess and became the face of resistance for us in Chicago. That illegal strike set a real precedent for us. Not that we ever thought we'd do an illegal strike, which we didn't. But what we have to realize is at this point in time, we are all being terrorized by neoliberal politics. They cross party boundaries. And as much as we reach out to one another, we are still struggling. We are struggling against an injustice that chooses who's worthy and who isn't worthy of a quality education. That is unacceptable. I have been hearing about the public school system is broken. Sisters and brothers, public school system isn't broken. The political system in this country is broken. That's what's broken. So I am glad to see that from Canada to Mexico to Puerto Rico to wherever we have to go, east, west, we are going to fight injustice, and we're going to do it together because that's the only way we can. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Today I'll talk about some of the struggles that we've had in British Columbia, because the British Columbia, which is such a beautiful province, also represents some of the extreme negative of what's happening in public education in Canada. And for the last dozen years or so, some people have described it as school wars. We've had a very right-wing neoliberal government, and ironically they're called a liberal party, but they are anything but. But we know where the Liberal Party is also in Canada and how they've moved to the right also. And there doesn't seem to be much difference between conservatives and liberals. And the first thing that they did was they cut taxes by 25%, personal and corporate. They cut taxes as the excuse, and they got elected, and there was a surplus And when they got taxes, they cut corporate taxes, they created this deficit as the excuse to go after public services. And that's what they did. They started gutting our public services to pay for the 25% tax cut. And it's a common tactic of right-wing governments everywhere to cut and reduce public services, cut tax revenue, creates a funding crisis, creates some dissatisfaction in the public with some public services, which then leads right into the whole area of privatization. They passed legislation that gutted our provincial collective agreement, eliminated all of our working conditions, which we know are our students' learning conditions. And you can't separate the two. This legislation also vaporized 10 whole local collective agreements as well. The stroke of a pen, 10 contracts negotiated since 1988 were gone in 2001, and one of them was my own. And worst of all, the law also said that it will become illegal for you to negotiate class size and staffing levels and guarantees for students in the future. You know, we walked out for one day, this political protest when that happened, and you know, hindsight, we should have been out on the streets and stopped them from what they were doing, but that's hindsight. And yes, Karen referred to our 2-week illegal strike in 2005. And that was over class size and class composition and staffing levels, even though we didn't have the right to negotiate it. But you know, we don't surrender, we don't give up. We have to keep fighting on, and that's what we've done. The International Labor Organization, the United Nations, I think 5 or 6 times has said to our government, you've violated labor rights. And these are labor conventions ratified by our Canadian government. Does it mean anything to our government in British Columbia? No, they don't care about international obligations. We've gone to court twice now to get our bargaining rights restored, and we've won twice. We've won twice now. 2011, our government was found to break the law, to violate the supreme charter of the country, the Constitution. 2011. The judge gave them a year to rectify the situation. And they put word for word back after 14 months, the same offending illegal legislation to Bill 22, so we took them back to court. And we won again. And we find out in court documents that the government had no intention of coming into a collective agreement with us. What they wanted to do was provoke a full-scale strike for their own political gain to turn public opinion against us. That was in the court documents, cabinet documents. And it also said that they bargained with us in bad faith when they were trying to deal with the first stripping of our collective agreement. But I think what the importance of it is that we can't be silenced. And the public, our parents, actually expect us to speak out in defense of our students' learning, of public education. Because if we don't speak out, no one else is going to speak out. And so we have to keep speaking out. We have to work together. We have to work in coalitions. We have to work in our communities. And we have to work with our parents. And so thank everyone for being here and continuing the struggle, because our struggle is a just one. Solidarity forever. Viva la Solidarité Internationale. Viva!
There's so much that goes on internationally, and I think for the last few years, and I know with our brothers and sisters from some of the other Canadian unions, and with our brothers and sisters down in Guatemala, Colombia, Argentina, I've been down there a few times. And what I find the most amazing thing that happens down there, when you go and you meet with the heads of those teachers' unions, they are wearing flak jackets underneath their shirts. They have bodyguards. There are some individuals have gone to local meetings and they have been shot as they exit the meetings. And as you go to these union offices down there, and these are for the teachers down there are monuments to those that have died in their classrooms, those that have died coming out of union meetings. And so much of what they do is really about defending public education. It's the same thing that's happening right across North and South America. Really is this concept, here's what we're going to do. We will create a crisis. Back in '96, we had a provincial government that was caught on tape saying, we are going to create a crisis in education. And that's exactly what they continued to do. They began to underfund it. They began to publicly run down the school system, so even the public started questioning the public education system. What they ended up doing was really pushing back, and we saw more and more parents, the enrollment starting to go up in private schools, which is what they wanted. That's exactly what they wanted to do. Consequently, the other thing they start to do are to cut taxes. So they cut taxes, now the revenues fall. Now we have a deficit. Well, the next thing that follows out of that, we're going to have to cut jobs. Well, we cut more jobs, we cut the revenues, we have another deficit, we need to cut more jobs, and they continually continue to underfund, not just public education, but all public services. We are in the middle of an election right now. We're in the middle of an election right now, and today, the leader of what we call our Conservative Party, they call themselves Progressive Conservatives, but it is the Conservative Party, he announced today that in their platform they want to cut 100,000 public service jobs. Now, 100,000 public service jobs, you might be looking at shutting down 28 mid-sized factories. That's really what it is, and the revenue and everything that's in those communities is just pulling out of it. It's absolutely mind-boggling that capitalists are no longer called capitalists, but they're called job creators. And the fact of the matter is, over and over again, whenever there are corporate tax cuts, you do not see that money going into jobs. It goes into profits, and that money is just squirreled away. It doesn't happen. We know what needs to happen. The revenues must be maintained, the money must go into there, and public education has to be defended. That's what we have to do. That is our job, but it starts at the political end. There is a concept out there, and it really comes from the right wing and the neoliberals, that you need to cut taxes, and when you cut taxes, you also need to cut services. But you can't cut services, and one thing we have to be very clear in this, public education is what holds all of us together. We are in the middle of an election that is 4 weeks away. At the end of those 4 weeks, we will know what kind of government we have. But at this point, I'm not even sure it matters who gets elected. It doesn't seem to matter who gets elected. We did our 2-week protest, a full 1997 is when it happened. We are back in the same situation again, continually trying to defend public education, its value, its worth to all of the citizens of the country. They are not just taxpayers, they are citizens. They are citizens that pay the taxes, and they have an expectation for social services. They have an expectation of good quality public education, and it's that good quality public education that we deliver year in, year out. No matter how much they cut the funding, I know your members do, I know all of our members do, we make a system work. We are the ones of the frontline workers that continually make that system work, but eventually we run out of patience and we end up with a protest, but we have to keep pushing back. What's at stake is too important, because once we lose public education, we are lost as a society, completely lost. Thank you.
During my visit to Mexico, I was truly inspired by the strength and commitment of the Mexican teachers who are sacrificing so much. I visited the plantón. It's a Spanish word for planting, because they literally planted themselves on the ground, where over 1,000 teachers were living on tents set up on concrete floors in cold weather, with no access to water or electricity. And they left their home states. They left their families and their children behind because they believed in improving the situation in the public education for all students. And their commitment and sacrificing of their lifestyle and peace for a quality education for all should be an inspiration and a lesson for us all. The visit helped me see that there are so many commonalities in our experiences and our struggles. I arrived to Mexico thinking that this was a Mexican struggle, but I left firmly believing that this is an international struggle.
Yo soy María Elena Lara, presidenta actual de la Federación de Maestros de Puerto Rico. Me acompaña Hugo Delgado, maestro federado y presidente de la Unión Local de San Juan IV de la Federación de Maestros de Puerto Rico. Quiero empezar agradeciendo la invitación que le hacen los organizadores de esta conferencia a la Federación de Maestros. En especial, quiero agradecer a los compañeros y compañeras de la British Columbia Teachers Federation porque nos ayudan a sufragar los gastos para este viaje. Muchas gracias. La Federación de Maestros ha participado en varias de estas conferencias de la Coalición Trinacional en Defensa de la Escuela Pública. Para mí es la primera vez que participo, pero otros compañeros han estado presentes en estas conferencias en años pasados.
Buenas noches a todos y a todas. Yo quiero dirigirme a ustedes, a todos, sin mencionar países, sin mencionar sindicatos. Quiero que nos reconozcamos educadores, trabajadores de la educación. Creo que es lo que nos une y nos tiene hoy en estas discusiones. Esta 11ª conferencia trinacional creo que nos da esa oportunidad, nos renueva. Bueno, hemos compartido la solidaridad en estos últimos años en la coalición trinacional y creo que es momento de pasar a la acción.
And there have been actions of solidarity during the life of this trinational corporate coalition, and I think that we now have to go over to more concrete actions.
En esta 11ª conferencia trinacional creo que tenemos la oportunidad, dado que se incorporan otros países, Puerto Rico, Chile, y incluso las condiciones actuales son muy adversas.
And now we see other countries like Puerto Rico and Chile coming into the coalition because we are all facing conditions that are very adverse.
Esa adversidad es necesariamente igual en nuestros países, vienen de una misma política global y creo que la resistencia también debe ser en ese sentido.
And these negative conditions for public education in our country are based on a common global offensive of capital that needs a united response in all of the countries that are affected.
El desarrollo del capitalismo nos ha arrebatado derechos universales y humanos y esto hace que la población en el mundo tenga una aspiración de una vida mejor.
Capitalism says that it is based on support for human rights, and this has given people around the world hope for a better life.
Si la política de agresión viene de una misma política global, creo que la resistencia puede en ese mismo sentido establecerse. Hay ejemplos muy importantes en México, en Estados Unidos, en Canadá y en toda Latinoamérica.
And I think that since these same policies are being imposed internationally, the resistance to them has also got to be international.
I'm going to speak about the Trinational Coalition in Defense of Public Education. Of these 20 years that have passed since the first conference was held at Evergreen State College. I'm also going to speak about solidarity, because solidarity, the concept of solidarity that we have built together, and many have been present throughout these 20 years, and who are here today, but they continue participating in the movements in the different countries. It's a solidarity. That's not charity. This is not about the stronger unions to the weaker ones, but people, a group as people who need to be helped. Here, we help each other. We build mutually our solidarity, and this is very important, because I think that also in the access of building this, it's a fundamental thing. We don't view solidarity as charity. The coalition was born. The starting point was a conference. This is also very important, because in the United States, a difference to what happens in many times in Mexico or in Latin America, academia is very separated from the social movements, and here it was born from the initiative of a conference and a university, of course, with the participation of labor unions, which is different, and organized by an organizer, an activist, throughout a lifelong, Dan Leahy. The coalition is a space where coming together, social organizations, unions, labor unions, Senate union activists and student activists. It has generated social spaces in which there is participated also parents, and the campaigns against the standard exams. In the state of Washington, for example, there's a group that is there participating of mothers and fathers of the students, which is linked to the national. There have also been social organizations participating in persons interested in supporting education. It's an example of work, of analysis, of developing proposals, of actions that support the struggle of many others in defense of public education.
We've had educational leaders from each of our countries speak eloquently about the tremendous attacks on all levels of public education that we face, and the growing response of educators and our allies to keep it from being hijacked by privatizers. In listening to these heartfelt presentations, I think we all found that despite the variations in the forms of attack, and despite the diversity in and among our countries, that there are what may be for some surprising similarities. Similarities because we face the same global forces and their neoliberal policies that are underlying the destruction of public education. One, we've got to go lower, down, and look at the economic bases behind these policies. Two, we have to work in solidarity within our countries and across our borders. And I call them political borders because there are some populations that have been divided by these borders. And we have to work in that. We have to be doing investigations of what kind of research we need. What do we need of, like, Pearson? How is it affecting our different countries? What about pensions? Should we just say we're not going to pay the debt like they did in Argentina, and we're going to use the money instead for our education? I mean, that's a model that we have to follow too. And again, it's this coming together and exchanging information, because all this technology can be turned in our favor. Yes, we have a job. We have a job, and our students have a job. Create another world that is democratic in all of our countries. Thank you.